Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today I will be doing my 2020 mid-season NA power rankings. As I mentioned on Monday, this video was split into two parts. Part 1 was the APAC power rankings. If you want to check that out, it'll be linked in the description as well as in the cards. But I'm going to rank all 13 teams in North America right now and give you my thoughts on it. What I do want to say is that because there are 13 teams, I'm going to have to be somewhat quick if I want to keep this video from getting too long. So I may not go super in-depth about why I have put a team where they are, or I may not go super in-depth about teams being a certain rank or whatever I have them. Just know that I have reasonings, and I'll try to explain it as best I can in as little time as possible. So without further ado, let's get into it and start at the bottom of my list with number 13, the Vancouver Titans. Now, this Vancouver Titans roster, 2-6 minus 12. That 2 wins, though, came with the old Vancouver Titans roster. This Titans roster, of course, a bunch of contenders players from North America and Europe. With the recent addition of Shockwave, this team looked a lot better in that DPS role now that they have an actual flex DPS player. But this team is yet to win. It hasn't won a game yet, and I think that that is the biggest hiccup for this team. Getting close to winning isn't winning. I need to see this team come up and get some wins against some of these other opponents before I'm really ready to say that they have made the jump and are better than 13. They've improved. I think this team getting together in one location will be very good for this team, but for now, I haven't seen enough for me to put them above 13, but I don't think it's impossible for them to move up from that spot. Number 12, I have the Washington Justice. Now, this team, 3-10 minus 16. Interesting spot for them. Obviously, recently parting ways with Elivote, though also recently signing Janu and Stitch, formerly of the Vancouver Titans, to long-term contracts. All-Korean roster now. I expect some more potential changes. I think this is a team that would benefit from potentially bringing in Fissure to replace Roar. I think Fissure would bring a lot to this team, and the fact that he has some synergy with Janu and Stitch, even if it was only for, a few months. They played together at least on the same team for some time. That could help them out. I don't think they will make that move. It's just a move that I could see them potentially making. It's a move that I think could and should be talked about for this team. I think this team will move up from 12. I need to see some changes to this team. Obviously, Janu has arrived in the US. I don't know when Stitch will arrive. I assume in the next week or so. I'd like to see more out of this team. I'd like to see them kind of perform well. I think that they have the basis for a pretty good team. I think they need a little bit more depth to this roster, but I think as a whole, they are still struggling. They still look pretty weak, but I think that they should improve with these new additions, and I'd like to see some more additions in the future. At number 11, I have the Boston Uprising, 2-10 minus 24. This is the team in the Overwatch League with the worst overall record. So you might ask the question, why are they at 11 and not 13 or 12? And the main reason for that is I think the Boston Uprising have had some pretty good results recently. I think they've looked pretty strong as a team recently. Obviously, good win against the Gladiators. While I look at the Washington Justice, their only win recently was against the Vancouver Titans in the very, very, very early stages of the Vancouver Titans joining the Overwatch League. Boston Uprising recently brought in Mikey, another main tank player who I don't think will get a ton of playtime, if any at all, but he is there. But the Uprising, obviously, like I said, good performance against the Gladiators where they won, and a good performance against the Paris Eternal where, though they lost, it was a close series. I need to see some more wins out of them before I'm willing to put them any higher than that on this list, but I do like what we have seen out of the Uprising in the past couple of matches. But I don't want to use 2 matches to completely justify this team going up any higher than this spot. They still struggled for the majority of the season, and they still only have 2 wins on the whole season. I don't think this is a team that we should be praising yet for the fact that they have won 2 games this season. We should expect a lot more from a team than that. And that is why I have them here at 11. At number 10, I have the Toronto Defiant. Now, this was the toughest stretch for me, 13 through 10. Deciding where teams go. I think they're all in very interesting spots, and there's some debates about where people can and can't go and where they should go, but ultimately I settled on this for the bottom 4. And the Toronto Defiant are sitting at 4-8 -6. And it is not impossible for this team to pick up some steam late in the season and make a good run. They added Numlocked this past week. They added Zeke right before the May Melee tournament. And of course, they added Cruz a couple of weeks before that. This is a team that I think is on a bit of a trajectory to potentially get a little bit better. And I think they've had some decent results. Of all these bottom 4 teams, they're the one team that I think has had the best overall results so far this season. They've had some close matches with some very good teams. Philadelphia, San Francisco, the 2 main ones. They had that win early in the season against Paris. How much do you put, how much stock you put into that at this point in time shouldn't really be a lot, but they have some decent performances under their belt so far. And that recent performance against the San Francisco Shock is the one that really stands out to me. They struggled in the May Melee. They barely beat the Vancouver Titans, and they were pretty easily dismantled by the Atlanta Reign. But I think the Toronto Defiant have been lacking a strong leadership figure for most of the season. I think Cruz could be that leadership figure for this team. I think Numlocked could be a good leadership figure for this team. I still have a lot of questions about this team, and I'd like to see them perform at a higher level than what we've seen from them so far. But I think they are the best of these bottom 4 teams, and I think that they will continue to showcase that despite their rough performances throughout May. At number 9, I have the Houston Outlaws. 5-9 -9 is their record. The notable thing here with this team is that they have not been playing Muma on the main tank. They've rather been playing Hydration for the most part. It's a very weird decision for them to make. I can only assume it means that they are not very happy or confident in Muma's play recently. Now, that could be not true. And the reason why I believe that it is a lack of confidence in Muma is because they pulled Muma out of a match and put Hydration in. And ever since, Hydration has been getting played. Granted, it was only 1 match, I think, since then. Maybe 2, but it hasn't been a lot. But this is a team that I think is very, very close to being able to compete potentially for that kind of middle of the pack. I think Dante has had a very great season. I think their DPS has been a very, very, very bright spot for this team. I think Meko has played very well for this team. I think the support line of Jexa Repel has been very good. Main tank for me is really the big question. If they can bring in a good, solid main tank player, I think this is a team that will get better and will be better. But right now, that main tank question is the huge lingering question, and I think it's the thing that is holding them back the most right now. But I think that is something that they should address, and if they do, we might see this Outlaws team getting a little bit better. But the fact that one position is pretty weak, and they're still struggling, means that there's probably some other problems that need to be fixed. I don't think fixing one player would completely change this season for them, but I think they are very close to being a very good team, and I think we will see, hopefully, some changes to this team and their main tank situation that will make things seem a little bit more understandable or polished for this team. Number 8, I have the Los Angeles Gladiators. Now, the Gladiators I have at this level because I don't have a ton of faith in what I've seen from them so far this season. They've had pretty lackluster performances on DPS aside from Birdring. And Birdring, while he's had a good season, I wouldn't call him an MVP candidate. He's not having an incredible season. He's having a good season. He's having a better season than what I expected from him. But Mirror and Jaru are not holding their weight. This is a team that is struggling in the flex DPS position. I think that Space is having a great year. I think this support line, for the most part, is having a great year. They've been very consistent. OG is having a bit of a shaky year, and it depends on the hero he's playing. His Reinhardt, I think, is where he has struggled the most. I think he's looked very good on Winston. I think his Reinhardt has not been as good. Obviously, that loss of the Boston Uprising, a huge hiccup for this team, a huge strike on this team, a huge point against this team, because they were unable to beat the worst team, well, arguably the worst team in the league. They didn't play well that series against a team that was not as good as they are. And I think that they have really been failing to live up to where they should be as a team that has been top 5 for the past 2 seasons. They need to make some additions, I believe, on that DPS lineup. I don't think Mirror and Jaru are the answers. I think that this team is struggling too much as a result of that. and I think that they need to be able to focus on being able to make OG a better player, because he's a very good and very talented player who needs some polish. And I think that the way that this team is built isn't really working the way that they intended. And I think that the first place you need to look is improving your DPS duo so that Birdring has someone alongside him who can actually contribute consistently at a high level, where we haven't really seen that out of Mira and Jaru for the most part. We've seen it a couple times here and there and on specific heroes, but for the most part, they haven't looked very solid. And that, to me, is the big hiccup on the Gladiators. That is where they need to improve, and if they can do that, I think that this is a team that can make a very good run late in the season. At number 7, I have the Dallas Fuel. Now, I could see the Dallas Fuel getting much higher than this. I think what we've seen out of the Fuel so far recently is a team that is very, very, very good at very specific things, but those specific things, I believe, are expanding. Obviously, we know Decay is a stud. He is dominating the season. He is one of the best DPS players so far this season, arguable MVP candidate. He has been carrying the Fuel in a lot of cases. Doha has been playing very well as well. But I also think that this tank line has been playing pretty well. Gamsu has impressed me. Note has looked pretty good. I think the biggest weakness on this team is the support line. I don't think they are holding this team back per se, but I think that they are the place where if they were to make improvements and make additions to this team, I think that is the first place to look to improve upon, is that support line. Is Closer the answer for the future? Is Crimzo the answer for the future? We just saw Zachary retire. I know I didn't put that up here. That's a DPS player gone, so that's not a huge issue for them. But it means that they have more roster spaces opening up, and I would think that maybe we could see some additions to this team in the future now that they have some more room on their roster. I like what they've done so far. I think they have actually looked pretty good, and I think they have looked more polished as the season has progressed. I really love what Decay and Doha are doing, and I think that as this season progresses, I think this team will only get better. 7 is where they are right now, but I think they are on the rise. For once, I do think that the Dallas Fuel are a legit team. Moving on to number 6, I have the Atlanta Reign. There's a lot of questions about this team. Where is Erster? What is their actual main lineup? Those are two of the biggest ones, I think, for this team in particular, but I think they have looked not as strong as we expected from them this season. Their record is 5-5, +5 differential shows that they're a little bit better than average, or at least better than average by having a positive differential, and a pretty decent positive differential despite having an even record. It would take at least 2 match losses for them to lose a positive differential. So they're in a decent spot, but they have just looked somewhat weak against some of these better teams. They beat the teams you expect them to beat. They struggle against teams that maybe they shouldn't necessarily struggle against, or they struggle against teams that are close to them. And I think this is really kind of the gatekeeper team right now. We saw them lose to Florida in the Melee. We saw them lose to the LA Valiant a couple weeks before that. But we've also seen them beat other teams. We saw them dominate Toronto in the main Melee, and we've seen them dominate some of these weaker teams in the league. They really are kind of the middle of the pack gatekeeper team right now. I think they have a very high potential, but we aren't really seeing that. And there's a lot of things that they're not doing and players they're not playing that makes me kind of ask some questions. I don't think this is a team whose season is over. I think they will improve. I think they should improve because their roster is just too good. But I do have some questions about this team. And based on their recent performances, I think number 6 is where they belong. Number 5, a team that did just recently beat the Atlanta Reign, is the LA Valiant. Now, I was under the impression that the LA Valiant were probably around, I guess, the 6th spot, maybe the 7th spot. Their performance in May and the May Melee really changed my opinion on this team. They were undefeated in the month of May. Now, they didn't have the toughest opponents. Atlanta was by far their toughest opponent. But, They beat Atlanta, they beat Boston, and they beat Toronto. Now, the Toronto series was pretty close. That was a result that I also forgot to mention that I thought was a decent one for Toronto. The Valiant are a team that I think have looked very good, but their big thing for me was their victory over Paris in the May Melee. I don't think they have everything going for them. I think there are some questions around this team. There are some places where I think they definitely have some weaknesses that are somewhat apparent. But I think this is a team who is showing that they are getting significantly better and much quicker than I kind of expected. Granted, it's halfway through the season at this point, pretty much, so it's not that much of a surprise. But they are a team that I think has definitely shown an improvement as the season has progressed. I very much like what we're seeing out of KSP and Shax. I think that Dreamer has been having a good season. I think McGravy's been having a pretty good season. They haven't lost a regular season match since Halsey retweeted him, so I think that's a pretty good thing for them. And overall, I think the support line has been solid as well. You know, I think their tank line is probably their biggest question, probably their biggest weakness, but I don't think it's holding them back at all. I think this is a team that has shown improvement and has shown that they are on the up and on the rise. I really like what we've seen out of them. They're a team that I just enjoy watching. I think they're fun to watch. They have a lot of great personalities. KSP and Shax are very dominant players who play out of their minds, have very good performances. They're a fun team. They have a style that I very much enjoy seeing because I think they know what their style is. There have been some questionable decision-making in terms of some compositions and roster decisions. Well, maybe not roster decisions. Compositions when they played the Shock in the May Melee that make you go, scratch your head a little bit. But it's a team that is, I think, showing that they have what it takes to beat some of these stronger teams. They just have to polish themselves off, clean things up, and I think they will be much better. At number 4, I have the Paris Eternal. Now, I fully expected the Paris Eternal to be my number 3 team following the May Melee. Obviously, as you can see, that is not the case. This team 7-5 plus 5. They have had some rough performances throughout the season. They have been inconsistent, and they have lost to some teams that maybe they shouldn't have lost to. But I look at this team now, and I think that they have a pretty good future ahead of them. Sparkle has just turned 18. He will be available for this team going forward. That is very good for them. That is something that this team will 100% benefit from because he is a very good player, and I think that helps them out a lot. Where I think this team's biggest weaknesses is the tank line, specifically the main tank position. And my opinion on their main tanks has somewhat lightened in the past couple of days. I was very harsh on Benbest and No Smite, but I have looked at some stats and I've looked at some VODs and had some conversations and discussions with people. And I do think that Benbest and No Smite have had certainly better seasons than they had last season. I think they've been very much improved from last season. But I still think that a consistent, solid main tank who can play more of all 3 of them at the same time would be much better for this team. No Smite is very good on the Winston. Benbest is very good on the Reinhardt. But I don't think either of them are world beaters on those heroes. No Smite is maybe a top Winston in North America right now. I think if you were to go into Asia, you would find he maybe isn't a top one. But in North America right now, I think competition-wise, he is looking like one of the better Winstons. Benbest's Rhine is solid. He's doing pretty well stats-wise, but he's not, performing, I think, at an incredibly high level. But where I really think this team's biggest weaknesses is the Orisa. Hanbin is arguably this team's best Orisa. Now, Orisa is very different in terms of impact, very different in terms of mechanical play, but I would like to see potentially them bringing in a main tank from contenders. The weird signing could be Fissure. I think that Sparkle could come in and give this team what they need to really punch for the top. And I think when XE returns, this team will definitely be full force and ready to go. And that's what I'm waiting for this Paris Eternal team. For when they truly are at full strength, I think they are going to be significantly better than what we're seeing from them now. And I think that they will be able to get there without necessarily replacing their main tanks. But I don't think replacing their main tanks would be a bad idea long term. I think this season they can probably get by with what they have. come next season, I would like to see a new main tank in the lineup for this Paris Eternal roster, but we'll see what happens when the team is able to be full strength. Moving on to number 3, I have the Florida Mayhem. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say the Florida Mayhem should be at number 2. And I don't disagree that the Florida Mayhem should be considered one of the top teams in North America right now. 9-4 record, +9 differential, runners-up in the May Melee tournament. They beat the likes of Atlanta, they beat the likes of Philadelphia, and they had a pretty close series against the San Francisco Shock in the finals. So they have some pretty good wins to go on recently, and they are on a major winning streak in the regular season. My ultimate problem with this Mayhem squad, and the thing that I look at as their biggest flaw and their biggest weakness, were a couple of things that I noticed throughout their series against the San Francisco Shock in particular. Chris is a good main tank or main support player, and his best role or best hero is the Lucio. But this team does not have a great option at Baptiste, because if you take Gangnam Jin off of the Zenyatta or off of the Ana, Chris is not going to be able to play very well either of those heroes. Now, if you're running Bap Lucio, well, then you're fine. If you're not, I think they have struggled, and Chris did not perform super well against San Francisco. Violet had his number. It wasn't even close. And I think that was the spot that really made me question this Mayhem roster. I also noticed a couple times against the San Francisco Shock, may have been nerves for playing against a team like the Shock. Maybe it was an actual lack of coordination, but I saw a bit of lack of coordination between Fate and Gargoyle on the Arista Sigma compositions, halts that were thrown in too early multiple times throughout the series. And it wasn't something that I thought cost them the series. They had a number of C9s in the series that I thought were much more impactful and kind of show a nerves and potential lack of big stage experience for most of these players. But I think this Mayhem roster has very much earned their spot in the top 3. I think they look very good in their recent performances, and I think that they have cemented themselves as a threat in the North American region, and I think they will be a team that by the end of the season we will be looking at as potentially one of the best teams in the league. Moving on to number 2, I think it's pretty obvious who this team will be. It is the Philadelphia Fusion. And I know, yes, this team lost to the Florida Mayhem in the May Melee, and it wasn't particularly close. The Fusion didn't look great. I don't want to put too much stock into one loss, much like why I didn't move the Boston Uprising super high because they had that one win against the Gladiators. I don't want to drop the Fusion significantly because of one loss to the Florida Mayhem. In my eyes, the Philadelphia Fusion were the number 1 team in North America going into the May Melee tournament. I was wrong. The Fusion are not the best team in North America. The San Francisco Shock are. But I still think the Fusion have a claim to be the second best team in North America. At the end of the day, they've still only lost 1 regular season game. They still have the best overall record in the Overwatch League. But we haven't seen them match up against San Francisco yet. We haven't seen them match up against the Mayhem before their loss for several weeks. So there's still some question marks. I'd like to see how this Fusion roster looks their next big game that they have, but I think they have certainly shown they're not the best team in North America, but this roster has so much depth and so much talent, and I think there's some things they've done that are weird. They switch between Fury and Poco a lot. I don't think they have cemented a solid DPS duo for every single week at this point. I think that they will start to kind of solidify as the season progresses and harden and get better. And I expect that to be something that happens somewhat soon. But this Philadelphia Fusion roster is too good, and they have shown too much and too many good results this season for me to put them below Florida, who, while having a very good season so far and have looked very good, they haven't done enough, in my eyes, to surpass the Philadelphia Fusion just by beating them once. Paris Eternal have also beaten the Philadelphia Fusion, and you don't see me putting them at number 2. 1 loss, 13 wins, very good differential. I cannot drop the Fusion below number 2. And that leaves, of course, as I said, at number 1, the San Francisco Shock. May Melee North America champions, 11-2 record, plus 15 differential. Recent addition of Twilight will make this team way better, and they don't even need him, and they're going to be better with him. My big thing with this team that I think is very weird is their differential at plus 15 is not as good as I would expect. Now, granted, their record is 8-2 without the 3 wins they earned from the May Melee tournament. But plus 15 is somewhat low for the differential that I would expect from this team. But I think that's just because they actually haven't played as many games as I, in my head, imagine they have played. And they had those 2 losses earlier on that were somewhat bad. And they haven't had super dominant victories against a number of teams. They've struggled a bit against teams like Dallas, and they had a bit of a struggle against Toronto. That wasn't too much of a struggle. I think Toronto just played better than what they expected. I think the Shock have cemented themselves once again as a top team in North America. Possibly top team in the Overwatch League, though that's up for debate because I think the Shanghai Dragons have really proven themselves as potentially the top team overall. Shock are good. They're solid. They're where you'd expect them to be right now after their performance last season. The losses of Architect and Sinatra haven't hindered this team too much. There's some players I think it would be interesting we saw them sign, but I don't want to spoil that for future potential discussion and potential future videos. But for now, that is where I have the Shock. So these are my power rankings, my 13 teams. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing for more stuff like this in the future. I'd love to discuss and hear from you anything about these power rankings, your thoughts on them, your own power rankings, whatever it may be. I would love to hear from you in the comments down below. But that is all I have for you. Thank you once again. Hope you're all staying safe. Hope you are all staying healthy. And I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.